interested in peace. And Prime Minister Olmert turned around and said, we can't do it because America doesn't want us to. Now, like I say, I don't know whether this was an excuse, but this was the argument used. Now, I know that this administration has been very forthright in saying we cannot want peace more than the parties themselves. But can you want peace so much less than the parties themselves? And so just to give you an example of the kind of commentary in the Israeli press in the last days, any of you familiar with Ben Caspit? He's the lead commentator in the Ma'ariv newspaper. It's the second most important circulation terms newspaper in Israel, and he's hardly known as a rabid lefty. Therein lies the rub. It's all about the Americans. Either Israel should stand up and publicly admit that it is an American protectorate and at least get the treatment that goes with it, or we should display some leadership. Would Ehud Olmert please stand up, travel to Washington, and explain to President Bush that when an Arab neighbor of Israel publicly extends its hand in peace, Israel would be rude, arrogant, and stupid to reject it. Yoel Marcus, the lead opinion writer in Haaretz, who broke the disengagement story with Sharon and was a strong supporter of Sharon. Yoel Marcus, Bush will go home, but we will still be here. Even if one of our greatest enemies extends a hand to us, we must first of all say yes. Now, thankfully, there is already apparently a presidential candidate for 08 out there who is advocating staying the course in trying to out-Israel the Israelis. John McCain has been in Jerusalem, and John McCain said to the Israelis, don't be tempted by these Syrian overtures for peace. Well, thank you very much, Senator McCain. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that this is going to culminate in Ehud Olmert kind of becoming a Middle Eastern Hugo Chavez. or that there is great movement in the barrios of Tel Aviv to oppose the terrible Yankee. Not at all. Israelis appreciate the relationship with the United States. But it has done us such a disservice in the last years. And it's rare that I quote him, but I do want to mention, because I do think, we do have a responsibility as Israelis. And what Danny Yatom, who's the former head of the Mossad and is an important Labour member of Knesset, has said, is I know, this is quoting him, I know that when the Israeli Prime Minister thinks that there is a particular step that Israel should take in order to promote its interests, he finds a way to approach the US President to persuade him that it is the right thing to do. Now, I still hope that that will be the outcome in Israel. But what we're seeing, and it brings me to my final comment, and it's on the Palestinian side, and it's Ziad has referred to it, and Jeff has referred to it. What we're seeing is not so much a debate between an American position of conflict management or conflict resolution. I fear that we're in the era of conflict promotion. And there is a notion out there that the way to achieve peace is to fuel conflicts until our guys, who are funded and armed by us, and sometimes taken out by our allies, carry the day. And that takes me to the Palestinian issue. Anyone who could explain to me how you get a more stable, secure, capable of delivering a ceasefire Palestinian reality by promoting Palestinian civil war needs their head tested. It is so dangerous to Israel to go along with this notion that if we arm the presidential guard and if we put enough money into lethal weapons, then they're going to carry the day. I think we have narrowed President Abbas's options, and we have done a disservice to President Abbas by not giving him the wiggle room to try and create the kind of Palestinian national unity government that I think may offer us the only way forward. I'm not saying that Hamas are easy players to deal with or that they have been helpful in this. But that should still be the outcome. And by the way, as you know, in Saturday's speech, Abbas still very much left the door open to trying to create a technocratic government. If somehow there is new elections and Fatah carry the day, I would just warn people that it's very likely that we will be back where we were 15 months ago. And that is, people will say, oh good, we have Abbas in power, we have Fatah in power, we're ready now to make a big peace deal with you. one minor thing. Can you just deal with that infrastructure of terror of Hamas before we make the deal with you? Because, of course, we can't make the deal when Hamas is still there with its infrastructure of terror. And a Hamas that went into politics and was then driven out of politics in a way that they perceived was totally undemocratic, I think would unlikely to be particularly cooperative. We need to look realistically at the internal Palestinian situation and to build the political horizon. And this notion of fueling conflicts really makes me wonder whether, despite claiming they're the greatest friends ever to Israel, whether this administration and the neocons, and by the way, our great friend 3 weeks ago, President Bush, was in Amman, Jordan. Those of you who know the geography, and most of the people in this room I think do know the geography, know that Amman, Jordan is a 40-minute helicopter ride from Jerusalem and Ramallah, or less than 2 hours by car, assuming that the president wouldn't be stopped at checkpoints on the way, which is a fair assumption. He didn't cross the border. In 6 years, he hasn't once crossed that border and visited Israel or the Palestinian territories as president. And, you know, I talked about fueling the conflict in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories. There's somewhere else where the conflict is being fueled at the moment, which is Somalia. And I say that because I wonder whether the instrumentalist way in which they look at the Israeli relationship should lead us to start thinking about Israel as Ethiopia, with no disrespect to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is playing the role in Somalia of trying to give a bloody nose to America's adversaries. And I think that's the role. That's the role they envisage for Israel. To fight their adversaries to the last drop of Israeli blood. And now I, as one Israeli, call me crazy, do not consider that pro-Israel. Thank you very much.